I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
July 20th, 1969. Over 600,000 troops were waging war in Vietnam. The New York Mets were on their way to winning the World Series. Rock and roll's greatest band was recording its last album. And Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were changing the course of human history.
The Eagle has landed.
Everyone that I've spoken to can remember where they were at that exact moment. And I think that's an incredibly beautiful thing, that human accomplishment brought the entire world together for those few moments.
We were supposed to pick up our mother from work, and she worked at a department store. And we picked her up and went to the television department. Now that is incredible. Of course, all the banks of television, all of them turned to that. And everyone stopped shopping. All the people stopped selling. Everything was in sort of suspended animation.
I found myself, when the landing took place, absolutely speechless. And the only time I think in my life that I was so overwhelmed, overawed, that all I could say is, oh boy, I think. Something of the kind, golly gee whiz, or some notable quote of that kind.
I just remember that it was the biggest thing ever. The most important thing that had ever happened in the world.
I was sitting on my mom's floor in the living room. I had the model kits from Aurora or Revell. In my own head, I probably made 6,000 landings that same day. Right there on the braided rug that my mom had in her front room, there was a low circular coffee table that had these kind of like umbrella legs that came up from underneath her, and I was underneath there all day long, waiting for it to happen.
My mother had said something to me that, what if he gets off the spacecraft and explodes? And since it was live TV, she didn't want her kids exposed to somebody exploding.
As well as feeling amazed by his being up there on the moon, I also felt a certain sadness over the loss of the mythology. The moon had always been this symbol more than a reality. Somehow when we put our foot on it and it was solid ground, it suddenly became rock as opposed to the moon.
It wasn't like, oh, this is something America's doing. It was just, that's a human being on the moon. This is something, we're all involved in this.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
10, 9, ignition sequence start. 6.
The Apollo missions. A triumph of human courage, ingenuity, and spirit.
Retro. Go. Farino. Go. Guidance. Go. Control. Go. Telcom. Go.
The genius and sweat of over 400,000 Americans, fulfilling the dream of John F. Kennedy.
This has got to be one of the most proud moments of my life, I guarantee you.
Liftoff and the clock has started.
From 1961 to 1972, 24 men journeyed to the moon. 12 of them walked on it. Blasting into the heavens, these voyagers witnessed incredible beauty, experienced ultimate thrills, and faced life-threatening danger.
Houston, we've had a problem.
It's impossible to do. I don't think people understand how hard it is to go to the moon, how many steps are involved, that you have to build a rocket. You have to build a suit. How do you land it? What do you eat? How do you eat? Where do you breathe? All of this, it's crazy. And they did it.
Tom Hanks, Imagine Entertainment, and HBO recreate the little-known true stories of mankind's greatest adventure in the dramatic miniseries Event, From the Earth to the Moon.
We want the audience to come away at the end of every one of our episodes and say, I had no idea that those things went on.
In a massive undertaking spanning 3 years and costing over $65 million, the production included filming in Orlando, Florida, at Disney MGM Studios, at the NASA Kennedy Space Center, and Edwards Air Force Base in California. Apollo program equipment was used for authenticity. The most accurate representation of the moon ever created was built on an enormous moon surface set. And over 600 visual effects shots were created to convey the reality and capture the visual poetry of spaceflight. 12 films tell the remarkable stories of the men, women, and machines of Apollo. The miniseries is the brainchild of Tom Hanks, Academy Award-winning actor and lifelong space nut.
Tom has always been a huge fan of space. He has seen 2001: A Space Odyssey 24 times projected. He likes to say that. Not on tape, not on laser, projected.
I think that NASA should probably send him up on the space shuttle just to calm him down.
We're talking about one of the scripts on Gemini. And I said, well, you know, in this particular mission, there was a backpack that the astronaut would get out and fly around with. And it sort of looked like this. Tom said, yeah, I know. I made it as a model kit when I was a kid. I thought, geez, you know, he knows more about it than I did.
I asked him if Lovell wore his Navy ring in space. And Tom goes, all 4 missions.
Hanks directs Part 1 and wrote and stars in Part 12, while overseeing all aspects of production. His aim is to stay true to the facts, while telling the awe-inspiring tales of Apollo many people have never heard. The miniseries is based in part on Andrew Chaikin's gripping chronicle of the Apollo program, A Man on the Moon.
The interviews were really the backbone of the research, but there was so much other material. I mean, fortunately, NASA recorded everything that happened on the missions. So, you know, you get fantastic things like Pete Conrad telling Al Bean and Dick Gordon how nervous he is about finding the landing site that they're going to try to get to on Apollo 12.
I got some kind of a horizon out there. I got some freighters too, but I don't know where I am yet.
He's up there saying, I hope I can find the surveyor, and then I hope I can land okay. God, it's making me nuts.
Chaikin's book so outlined all the different missions, and I remember the day Tom came in and said, you know, what's amazing is there's a story in every single one of these missions. There's drama in every single one.
What we'll be filming here today is Gemini 8. And if you ask the average person, well, what happened on Gemini 8 in 1966, I believe it was, they'll say, I haven't the vaguest idea. Well, if you say, well, 2 American spacemen almost died in space because of one of the retro rockets started firing without any explanation. They'll say, oh, really? Is that real? And that's interesting. And so, yeah, and you know what? And one of those guys was Dave Scott, the man who went to the moon and drove an electric car on Apollo 15. And he'll say, oh, really? I had no idea. You know who the other guy was? And they'll say, no, who was it? You'll say, well, only Neil Armstrong, the first man to step foot on the moon.
There's no point in doing this show if you're going to make it up. Because there have been a million movies about made-up space. Someone can pull any episode off the shelf, watch it, and say, that's what happened.
They provided us with thousands and thousands of pages of research material. In fact, we got so much research material that no one ever bothered to look at the script.
You become a total, space geek. That we're going, well, now this computer program, this LPD of 40 degrees, I'm saying all these technicalities, and you get totally into it.
We can probably land the lamb at this point, but we don't know the story.
Veterans of Apollo lent their stories and recollections of the incredible endeavor while verifying the accuracy of the recreation.
Like for the windows in Shepard's flight, where there are really windows or where they are not. So they are doing a great job of being accurate.
What a beautiful view.
Astronaut Dave Scott was on set every day as technical consultant. One of only 12 men to walk on the moon, Scott spent 546 hours in space during the Gemini 8, Apollo 9, and Apollo 15 missions, and drove the lunar rover on the surface of the moon.
Isn't that beautiful? By golly, that's just super.
He was also kind of inspiring because at one point he said, you guys are making a movie and I appreciate that and you want it to be entertaining and exciting and I know you all have your jobs to do, but here's a chance to actually get a record down and to show people in a way that documentary footage never really can. And I know there are limits, but isn't that a worthwhile kind of additional goal? And so it was very inspiring. You'd hear that and you'd just kind of nod and say, oh, yes, Commander.
And these astronauts, Dave Scott or Jim Lovell, the way they talk is in such a low-key way that it's such a non-hypey way of communicating that is completely aberrant to the way we are in Hollywood.
While checking all props, equipment, and spacecraft procedures, Scott also coached the actors on the personalities and behavior of the men of Apollo.
I've asked him numerous questions. I think he's getting tired of me. He goes, Dave.
Most of the actors, in fact all of them, were very interested in how Mike Collins did this or did that, or Al Bean did this or did that, so that they could portray the individual accurately. And then when we started shooting, I would sit next to the director and respond to any questions he may have, or tap him on the shoulder and say, maybe something like this.
When I was a kid, I just thought, automatically, I just assumed that by now we'd be traveling in Pan Am space clippers. Now, never mind, there's no space clippers and not even a Pan Am anymore.
We used to do stuff like a cardboard box and get in it wrapped up with as many blankets and stuff as you could. At the top we have this long flight of stairs, you know, and it was like a moon shot, you know, to get in this box, and you know, you're all wrapped up in it, this big tight thing, and then your brothers would shove you off the top of the stairs.
And I had a football helmet on and a walkie-talkie, and I jumped off my roof. My brother was down below, and it was a short trip through space, but it was effective. I'm glad I had the helmet.
My parents brought me to NASA when I was, I think, 10 or 11. We went to the Space Center, and I got a little book of stickers, and I joined the NASA club, and they sent me little things every month. And I was very into it for a while, and had a Saturn V model on my desk.
We had the G.I. Joe space capsule and all that stuff, and it was, you know, the sliding. I remember clearly the sliding plastic panel and the G.I. Joe in a kind of a Mercury suit. It was sort of silverish, and you'd bring him out there, and I think even the helmet had a little visor that went up and down. Oh, yeah, astronaut. You bet. Played that all the time.
With unparalleled courage, the astronauts risked their lives to conquer a world that has fascinated human beings for centuries. Who are these voyagers?
I think the astronauts were modern-day Renaissance men.
They were engineers, and they were PhDs, they were metallurgists, they were rocket scientists. It wasn't just a matter of, they were great pilots. Buzz Aldrin, he shot down MiGs in Korea and stuff like that. But they also were incredibly schooled guys, and they had the analytical minds of engineers. That you can take something like the Freedom 7 spacecraft, and they will understand where the wiring goes and how it connects. I mean, all these systems all interconnect, and you don't just flick a button and turn something on. You flick 16 different buttons that power up certain switches that make something possible in order for you to make adjustments to something that can happen.
Intellectual endurance, that's so true.
It's awesome. I mean, I think that I can sort of work hard on a problem all night long, and I think these guys burn me down.
To be an astronaut in the 1960s, I think, was like being a rock star. You know, I think they were all full of pee and vinegar, and there's a couple stories about them. The original 7 used to drag race their Corvettes through the streets and highways of Houston.
None of them had ever been second in anything. They all thought they were going to be the first one to go up. They all thought they were going to be the first one to walk on the moon.
They were cowboys. You know, the world was fixated on these guys.
Everything had to do with the moon. You know, toothpaste. It's what the astronauts use. You know, this car. Hey, the astronauts drive this car. You know, I mean, it was just the fever was caught by everyone.
Certainly, the ladies were interested in the astronauts. Sort of like being Tom Jones in the '60s, but you get to go to the moon.
The chariot transporting these gods the 250,000 miles to the moon was the Saturn V rocket. It possessed 1/10 the power of an atomic bomb.
At every turn during the flight, from the liftoff to the splashdown, at every turn there's the potential for complete disaster. You know, for one, the rocket blowing up on ignition, the capsule not separating and falling like a dart to the earth with the booster behind it.
I called Wally and I said, you know, I'm sitting there thinking about you being in Gemini, and you know, the rocket ignites and it doesn't go anywhere, and there's a shutdown, and you're sitting on top of 550 tons of liquid fuel. You get an abort handle in your hand and you don't pull it. Why don't you pull it? You know, you don't pull it because who knows what that abort handle thing will do. They know what they think it'll do, but no one's ever done it. So, you know, they got the balls to just say, hold on for a sec, and walk out of that 550-ton bomb and come back 2 days later and take off and do it again.
I was having lunch one time with Dave Scott, and I asked him what was it like to get into the elevator at the bottom and to go up slowly past this monstrous, white, hissing, belching rocket that was, you know, the biggest thing that was ever built, and get into a little tiny capsule on the top of it. I mean, what were your thoughts going by that thing? And he said he wasn't even looking at it. He was looking at the view, because it's a cool view from up there. And I found that to be pretty amazing, to be quite honest with you. I'm looking at the view.
They really know how to handle themselves under pressure. I remember Dave telling me about the mission he was on with Neil Armstrong, where their capsule started spinning out of control.
And they're going to pass out in a few more seconds.
And I said, well, were you scared? What were you thinking?
And you're just scared to death, right?
He said, well, we knew that we were just a few seconds away from reaching our physiological limits. Physiological limits? You mean dying? Is that what you're trying to say to me, Dave? You were a couple of seconds away from dying? Ah!
You know, we're in that business because we're used to handling situations that are not good situations. So there's very seldom any panic. So you have to be careful that when these are acted out, that actors and directors who are normally interested in excitement and challenge have to keep it sort of cool to represent the culture.
The most challenging thing is that Dave Scott is saying, no, wouldn't have happened like that. It's sometimes there's moments where he's like, it's like saying, no, the shark wouldn't eat people. The shark wouldn't eat people. Do something else. Like, yeah.
The strong commitment to accuracy extended to the brilliant suit and capsule replicas built for the filming. The Apollo spacesuit was the most complex garment of its time. It protected the astronauts from temperatures on the moon ranging from 243 degrees below zero to 225 degrees. It weighed about 180 pounds. The suit replicas had over 180 individually made pieces, including 24-karat gold-coated helmet visors, just like the ones that protected the Apollo astronauts from the rays of the sun.
First day I was in the suits was the astronaut walk, which was a physically exhausting day. I mean, the suits weigh 60 pounds, so I lost 9 pounds first day.
These aren't real spacesuits, but they're kind of brilliant mock-ups. And we're very lucky we have coolant suits underneath, vests underneath here that we strap on that has cold water running through it, and they can control the temperature.
There it is. It's going around my chest right now. It just went down my spine. It's kind of nice. It's saving my life.
We also have an airflow system that they hook up a hose here and pump air. So when we have our helmets on, there's oxygen flowing.
We had a couple of times we were working very late at night, and the AD would call RAP, and the electricians would just turn off the power, forgetting that it's like, excuse me, I know we're like spoiled babies, but could you just take us out of here before we die? I wanted to have one of those little hammers, you know, in case of emergency break glass.
The Apollo command module was less than 13 feet in diameter and contained over 30 miles of wiring.
It's as though somebody designed a machine to go to the moon and then later on realized they were going to put a human in it. You know, if they had any smaller, Billy Barty would have been the first man on the moon.
Okay, my feet are wedged.
On re-entry, the capsule traveled 25,000 miles per hour, while the heat shield withstood 5,000 degrees.
You look at this and it's really kind of like a glorified soup can, and you're like, my goodness, you know, we worry if there's like turbulence on a 747.
Capsule replicas built for the miniseries were duplicated from NASA diagrams. All the switches and gauges operate by remote control.
There's controls behind your head, and there's a little mirror there which rotates all around, and behind, the controls behind his head are all written in backwards, so you can look in the mirror and read the controls behind and push buttons back here too.
The replicas that were used on this film were every bit as good as any mock-up we ever had, which made my job much easier because I could go to a checklist for an actor in a scene, and the checklist would say switch A, B, or C, and I could go into the replica and it was there in exactly the right place.
You spent 3 or 4 days on your back and they're looking at these same switches, and you start saying, hey, that's the right switch I'm hitting, that's pretty cool. And you get into it. I mean, I many times during this project I have sat there and just, you know, looked at the astronaut stuff and say, this is so very cool. You know, it is just plain cool.
perhaps the most ambitious and most difficult mission recreated was the tragedy of the Apollo 1 fire.
I mean, it was almost an unearthly kind of a fire. It only took 20 seconds for the fire to start, sweep through the spacecraft, and then burn itself out. The pressure inside the spacecraft had gotten to be so high, something like 2,500 pounds per square inch, that it ruptured the hull of the spacecraft. The astronauts never had a hope of escaping because it was a hatch that opened inward into the cabin. And once the fire started and the pressure built up, there was no way to open that hatch.
All three of those guys, apparently the last things they were doing was their job. One guy's saying, we're on fire, you know, we've got a fire in here. He's broadcasting even when the flames are right on him. The other guy is hitting a purge valve, or, you know, trying to contain this fire. And Ed White, my character, the last thing he was doing was reaching up and trying to get this hatch loose.
They operated as heroes, and that's what we, I think, intend really to show, is that these men were in fact heroes.
Through meticulous examination of NASA footage, photos, and mission transcripts, the time of Apollo came to life during filming.
The sets are extraordinarily detailed. Our mission control is a recreation down to the square inch, and probably down to every cigarette butt is in the right place and every coffee stain.
There was a number of binders as set dressing, and I picked up a binder, and it was an original checkoff list for the Saturn V rocket and its launch, step by step, and it was like 150 pages of it. You never see that on a set.
30-year-old Apollo artifacts, long forgotten by NASA, were recovered and restored for the filming, including the White Room, through which the Apollo 11 through 17 crews boarded their spacecrafts, the Apollo 11 astronaut van, and the Apollo Command Module and Lunar Module simulators.
Well, these simulators are the actual ones that the Apollo crews used. This one here is for rendezvous, docking in space, which was real important for actually being able to bring a guy back from the moon. This one right here was the lunar landing simulator. And it's kind of neat. It's connected to this mounted camera here, which responds directly to the commands that you give it inside the lunar module. And there's like a 10-foot diameter lunar surface made out of plaster of Paris. And the camera will come closer and closer as you steer it closer and closer.
The lunar module from the canceled Apollo 18 mission was also refurbished for the miniseries.
As a matter of fact, they still got my torque wrench for closing the hatch here.
It'll never happen because I don't have the math, and it's still far too expensive, you know. If they ever had like this need for somebody with honestly no usable skills in space, well then I might be in the running to do it.
I would go, but only if I could take my whole family with me. Come on, we're hopping in the wagon, we're going down the street. You know, kind of like a family vacation. I would do that.
I always had the thought, you know, I mean, wouldn't that be fun if I stashed away in one of the spacecraft, you know, and then, Houston, we got a problem. Yeah, what's the problem? We got one more guy up.
Oh yeah, I'd go in a minute. Absolutely. I think it would be exciting and thrilling and amazing.
What can they do? They can fire you when you get back, right? But you had a space flight.
So far, NASA has not expressed any interest in having someone go up and run an experiment on how well improvisational workshops go in zero gravity.
I'm still trying to figure out Earth.
I think the question that we all struggle with is, what is it like on the moon? What's it really like? It's very difficult to explain that because it is such a, you know, a magnificent scene. It's very difficult for an engineer, pilot, whatever, to describe these things. If you had a poet or a painter, Al Bean's a painter, does very well. If you have that level of talent on the moon, then you could probably get a really great description.
The challenge that we laid down to ourselves was that we were going to photograph men walking on the moon in a way that's never been photographed before.
To take viewers where only 12 men have gone before, 3,500 tons of dirt and nearly 2,000 tons of pulverized granite filled a 298,000 square foot blimp hangar.
We are using, I think, a bigger set than anyone has ever used before. We have about 3/4 of an acre of moon, which is never big enough, unfortunately.
Well, when I first saw the moonscape, I guess my reaction was, this should work.
Our director of photography, Gail Tattersall, has created an amazing sun effect which is really what sells this as being real.
The solution turned out to be using a convex mirror about 6 feet in diameter and then projecting into it the most powerful spotlights that are available in the film business today, which are 10K xenons. There were only 15, I believe, in the United States, and we had to have 5 made extra just to be able to get our brightness level up to being able to record on film.
I would say the light that we have created to simulate the sun on the moon is probably one of the single brightest light sources ever created for anything.
We figured out it was going to be very hot because when we were doing tests for this, my best boy was lining up xenons with welder's glasses on and his hair almost caught on fire.
The greatest challenge is eliminating the effect of gravity. That's what we're using our helium balloons for, to create, to reduce the weight of our astronauts to 1/6 their real weight and create the look of what it would be like for them to move on the moon.
For accuracy, the topography of the moon set changed to match the different landing sites of each lunar mission.
Everything we're trying to do with the stuff on the lunar surface is to show it in a way that's never been done before, and to honestly make it feel as though the viewers are the third astronaut that are on the moon with these guys.
The Apollo program was probably the greatest single human endeavor in the course of human history.
It's sort of the time in the space program before commerce took over.
I mean, Christ, they call it a shuttle now, you know? It has connotations of like they should serve you a Happy Meal on the way up and back or something, you know what I mean?
I was interested in reading about the repairing of the Hubble, you know, a couple weeks ago. It was on page 28 of the LA Times. I don't think that's right.
From the first time people ever looked at the moon, there was no way that we were ever gonna not go to the moon. It's like a child, you know? You don't believe anything's real till you've touched it.
It's the one frontier that will never be fully explored. There will always be out there. There will always be more to find. We will never reach the end of the universe. And so looking up into the sky will always capture our imagination.
It's still our closest neighbor in the cosmos. It is still a place that is just, I mean, every corner of it is still waiting, still holding something that's going to be magical, that is going to be amazing, and that is going to be a mystery still until we go up there and start tramping around the place again.
Why, some say the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.